Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. If it's all right with everybody who's on now, I think it's appropriate for us to get started. Good evening, everyone, to the 55 folks who are joining us via the streaming platform and our lovely co-panelists here today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ricardo Martinez, Executive Director for GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, or GLAD Law. I'm happy to be here with my dear friend and colleague, Imani Rupert-Gordon, the Executive Director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. For those of you who may not know, Imani and I go, I'd like to say way back, although maybe she doesn't. And she's one of my favorite collaborators and movement partners. And I really appreciate just the kind and gentle way that she navigates the world and the transparent and honest way that she leads with her heart. She's one of my favorite people to see and to collaborate with. So I'm just experiencing a lot of joy to be in this room with her today and partnering for the first time as Executive Director of GLAD Law. So thank you so much, Imani, for joining us, and so happy to be here.
Oh, Ricardo, thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. If you are watching this, I'm sure you know how closely NCLR and GLAD work together, but I want to echo what Ricardo said. Ricardo is a trusted friend of mine, and if it's possible, I'm even more excited about GLAD Laws and NCLR's collaboration. So this will be really, really exciting. So today we are joined by some brilliant minds. Shannon Mentor, the legal director at National Center for Lesbian Rights, and Jennifer Levi, GLAD Law Senior Director of Transgender and Queer Rights. Welcome to you both. So today we're going to have this event. It's called An Evening with Transgender Rights Trailblazers. And I just want to say that we are sitting with royalty because these are two of the most senior trans rights litigators in the movement. And I cannot think of two better people on this planet to have this conversation with right now at this pivotal moment when we're thinking about transgender rights. We just had an oral argument in a major trans rights case at the Supreme Court earlier this month in Skrmetti. And many of us are watching the congressional vote on the NDAA, which could wind up including a provision that would target transgender people and deny military families the ability to get established medical care for their trans kids. So I know that so many people, all of us included, are very concerned about what to expect from this incoming administration, and that's why this conversation is so important.
Yes, thank you, Imani. I'm seeing folks joining I'm paying attention to the comments and the private chat and listening to you. So I'm multitasking, but I just want to give a shout out to people from Omaha and Austin who have joined, and South Carolina and Connecticut. We have people that are joining from so many parts of this country. So thank you very much. We're going to talk a lot about what Imani just kind of previewed for us over the next hour or so. Back in October, Shannon, Jennifer, and I had a conversation with a small group of community members here in Boston about their decades of experience working in the movement for transgender rights. I did not know that I was with royalty. So I don't know. I'm underdressed, I feel like. It really was an inspiring session. It was great to have Shannon from Texas join us on the East Coast and be celebrated alongside Jennifer at our Spirit of Justice Award the day after. I think that there's a lot to discuss, and so a lot has changed since we had that conversation in October. And I think the groundwork has been laid in that conversation, the original conversation, and it's going to be a good jump-off point for us to pick up where we left off. Right, so much has changed in such a short period of time, and I know that NCLR as well as GLAD Law and our other partners are actively working to prepare for what we may know, what we may expect, and some of the intangibles and some of the things that we don't know, right? And so really excited to be here again with all three of you and really looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. So tonight, what we're going to do is show some clips from that October conversation that Ricardo just mentioned, and then Jennifer and Shannon will share some further reflections after each of the segments. And so you may notice that there's a comment section over here. We are able to take your questions. So just go ahead and write in that live chat function. And then we will get to as many of those questions as possible. And we'll do that throughout the program. Sound good, everyone? Okay, so we are going to get started. So the first set of clips is a really great discussion, and this is one that I've heard before, and I'm excited to see this clip. But this is about how the two of you first met at a conference in Texas in the 90s. And this is some of the early foundations of what was now known as the transgender legal rights movement. So can we play that first clip?
Context. I think we met in 1996 in Texas, a little Texas history for you, at a conference called the International Conference on Transgender Law and Employment Policy, informally known as ICLEP. And I think it might have been Houston, although I'm not entirely sure. But I, at the time, I'd been a lawyer for not very long at all. I was doing work that I didn't like very much, and had a teeny little travel budget to do I didn't know what. And so I looked to see how I could get more deeply involved in transgender law and policy. And up pops this conference on transgender law and employment policy. And I thought, that's great, I'm going to go to that conference, which was in Houston, Texas, in like the summer, I think it was like July of 1996. And it was at like a Quality Inn or Comfort Inn or something like that. And I went to this conference and I walked into a room of about 100 people, most of whom were either transgender women or people who identified at the time as cross-dressing men. And my eyes really kind of quickly went up to this very front right-hand corner of the room to 5 transgender men. And it was the most, well, transgender people for sure I'd ever seen in my lifetime, but more transgender men that I had ever met. And it was like I walked into what felt like my home. And I didn't even really know it at the time. And I met Shannon at the time, and I also met Stephen Whittle, who has been the architect, really, of transgender rights globally. And I met a couple of other, like a tiny handful of other transgender men who have done extraordinary work over the last now nearly 3 decades. But kind of to circle back to your question, at the time there was, Shannon, I asked you to follow up on this. I mean, there was like a tiny bit of law relating to transgender protections. A lot of it was in the context of family law, and actually it was fairly positive, mostly, or not uniformly bad, I guess I would say. And there were, no non-discrimination. One state that had non-discrimination protection, that was Minnesota, and it felt maybe almost like accident, but probably say a little bit more about that too. And but for me, it really, engaged me in this work in a really serious way that has, become this incredible professional journey. But I partly marked that time because even though now we are facing this unbelievable backlash and, laws attacking transgender people and transgender young people and reversing protections that have really grown over the years, it's hard to mark like which is worse or bad, because it felt so impossible to even have like dignified conversations about transgender people's lives in the mid-1990s. And there were cases that you probably remember these details better than me, that compared somebody that wanted to transition to a donkey that wanted to be a different animal. I mean, that was the level of analysis in cases. And so I try to bring that perspective to what we're facing, because of course, I mean, it's such incredibly challenging times at the moment, but I also feel like it's in part because of the foundational work that's been laid and the visibility around transgender people's lives and the support that people are beginning to find from families and progressive states. Massachusetts, even in this last legislative session, passing a law to allow for really broad changing gender markers across documents and recognizing non-binary people. And, there's just a lot of progressive work that is happening at the same time. And I think that is a foundation for also what we're facing now. And so I'm going to then flip it to you, Shan, to ask about what are those changes that you've seen? And I don't know if you want to give any more context to kind of, what things were like in the 1990s.
Yeah, no, I love hearing you talk about ICLEP. That was so important for me, but more importantly for the beginning of that created a network of transgender advocates that persists to this day. Here we are, and the others too, and it was just so extraordinary. What it made me think of so many things, but one of the somewhat little bit humorous note, although it was bittersweet. I remember when I got to that conference, I was like, I have never in my life seen a conference this well organized. I mean, what in the world? I mean, every detail and the woman who organized it, Phyllis Fry, who became the first openly transgender judge in the country in Texas. Okay, that happened in Texas. She was just such a visionary. I want to say more about that in a minute. But I remember saying that to Phyllis and saying, gosh, the conference is so well organized. She's like, yes, because Dee, this woman who's organized, was an engineer at NASA. I mean, it was like, it was all these transgender women who had been incredibly accomplished and got fired. They didn't have jobs. It was really, boy, that was quite an experience in every way. But yeah, I'm just gonna say a little more. Yes, at that time, it was so exhilarating to be part of that movement. And we were just all over the country. Transgender people were organizing to get local anti-discrimination laws, and we were thrilled to get those. And there's a whole network of people at the local level comparing notes and how do you say this argument, that argument, what's the best language to use, and all that. It was really something. But the couple other thoughts about that is that I remember going to these conferences. Oh, and Phyllis would so there would be these panels of these amazing people, truly amazing. It was so diverse. Do you remember that? It was geographically diverse, racially diverse. Trans men, which Phyllis went out of her way to include transgender men, which at the time was nobody even knew there were transgender men barely. Anyway, it was really something. And people there were allies there who were really experts in different areas of law. And Phyllis had court reporters. This was before the days of recording things in Zoom. And so all the transcripts from all those proceedings were recorded. They're now available in an archive at Texas A&M University, which Ricardo knows that's quite saying something. That is one of the most conservative universities in the country, and that Phyllis made that happen because that's where she went to school. But I remember hearing arguments for the first time way back in the 90s, 1990s, at this conference that were later adopted by the U.S. Supreme Court in Bostock. The argument for why discrimination to the person transgender being sex discrimination. And, it's really something to see that seed grow into a body of case law, which Jennifer had a lot to do with. First case in the country getting a federal court to hold that discrimination against a transgender person is sex discrimination under a federal sex discrimination law. Anyway, that was something to be part of. But the other thing that's just hitting me, thinking back to that, is I don't know where Phyllis got the courage to do what she did or the vision to do what she did, but we need to remember that. At the time when we had nothing, and transgender people were so stigmatized and just scorned and viewed with disgust, and Phyllis herself went through hell. She had crosses burned on her lawn. She was targeted by terrible hate groups in Texas. But she put forward this vision that we were part of the national fabric, that we deserve equality and dignity.
Welcome back. I don't know, for those folks who may have joined us a little bit late, and we're just trying to catch up to the conversation. I think we were having a discussion, appreciation, in awe of Phyllis Fry, who has been a leader in transgender rights movement since the 1970s, and probably would hate me to say this, but her legacy and is sometimes known as a grandmother of the transgender rights movement, and was the first judge, openly transgender judge in the country in Houston, Texas. And any reactions, things that we want to add, Jennifer, Shannon?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, first of all, I just want to say, because we didn't get to respond to the lovely introduction at the outset, it is such an honor to sit among this group. And I really do want to thank Imani and Ricardo especially for the leadership that you are bringing to the work at this unbelievably challenging moment. And I feel like we couldn't be in better hands to take on the work that's ahead of us. So, you know, I appreciate the historical perspective that we look back at that video. I will say I'm happy that you don't have actual video from the mid-90s. So we don't have to see that comparison over the years. But, you know, it feels so important to reflect on the kind of historical challenges that transgender people have had to navigate and the ways in which the legal challenges have really built over the years to both create a community and to create protections for a community. And so, but we are facing what is a backlash. And of course, there is no backlash without the foundational work to react to. And so, you know, one of the things I want to say to everybody that's listening is that we have to be courageous, we have to be nimble, and we have to be brave. And I feel the both weight of that and the opportunity of that in this moment. So it's nice to hear that historical perspective. I will say that one of the questions that came up during the Supreme Court argument on December 4th, challenging the law prohibiting medical care for transgender adolescents, the Skrmetti case, I'm sure everybody's been following it, is whether or not there is a history of de jure discrimination. And that was a question about whether or not transgender people have faced not just social discrimination, but discrimination as a result of the function of law. And the answer is like resoundingly yes. It's come in a lot of different forms, and we can talk about that. But I feel like it's so important to us to know the history of the work that we are doing in order to be able to navigate the moment that we're in, and also to say to transgender young people and transgender older people as well that we stand on the shoulders of giants in doing this work, and there is a path forward, and there's an architecture and a framework that's been laid that we're building on. Shannon, what do you think when you hear that?
Well, no, thank you for saying that, Jennifer. That's so true. And I just echo thank you to Ricardo and Imani. Your leadership now, it means a lot in this moment. Every time we talk about the history of Phyllis Fry and the International Conference on Transgender Law and Employment Policy and the incredible sense of community and shared vision that she created, you know, I am reminded of how important it is for us to do that again now. I feel like this is another moment when maybe even more so than back then, it is so important that we remember that we are part of a community of advocates who we are not just advocating for some other group of people, we are advocating from within a community, you know, for ourselves and our families. And I just want to call out, I saw in the chat Samuel Lurie and Dylan Shalinsky, who are right with us back from that era, and both transgender men who've done a lot of incredible work. And I want to let everyone know that Dylan Shalinsky's book is coming out in the Last Time I Wore a Dress, which was absolutely groundbreaking, and about his experience of being locked up as a teenager and involuntary psychiatric hospitalization for what was then called gender identity disorder, and tried to force him to be feminine, etc. And that is a very powerful book. And it refers to being in an isolation room wearing a hospital gown, The Last Time I Wore a Dress. It's being reissued in a new publication with some new prefatory material. So that's very exciting. But yeah, we're doing this in community. And Phyllis taught us, even at a time when we had no standing in the world, when transgender people were so stigmatized, so despised, so marginalized, that we had to have this powerful, positive vision of ourselves and put that forward and set out an agenda publicly and to one another and to the world about the equality, dignity, and respect that we deserved. And that's what we need to do now again. And I appreciate every single person listening to this, and all Jennifer, you and all our colleagues who are working on this project with us.
Thank you. I was having a conversation earlier today with a colleague about just knowing our history, and then sometimes some of those recycled tactics that get used or were used back in the 70s and 80s and 90s kind of make a comeback, right? And it's important to look back in order to be able to move forward. And oftentimes some of the inspiration, the things that allow us to keep moving and going are people that have shown up with a tremendous amount of uncommon courage in moments that felt a lot more, well, not a lot more, as hostile as they may seem today, right? And so just hats off to everyone who has been in the fight for so many years. Hats off to everyone getting into the fight and practicing uncommon courage now. Tap in and tap out, is the thing that I tell people. When you're good and ready, we're here. And when you need to take a break, do the same, and we'll be here still. We're going to move on to the next clip. This was a discussion about the challenge to the 2017 transgender military ban, which GLAD Law and NCLR successfully led together, and the impact it had for people to hear the stories of transgender service people and those who are ready to serve.
Yeah, I mean, kind of linking back to the first question, I think one of the really pivotal moments and pivotal cases around transgender advocacy was the challenge to Trump's announcement of a ban on military service for transgender people. And, like so many things, he said it was going to happen and it was coming. And it was just, a few months into his administration in 2017 that he issued a tweet that said transgender people can't serve in the military. And I'm so proud of the work that we did. And, Shannon and I both look back to the summer of 2017, and I still really can't believe what we were able to put together in an incredibly short period of time to challenge that ban, including affidavits from each of the secretaries of the branches of the military, who were people who taught me for sure about military service and how that ban was going to undermine the stability of the country and how it interfered with military service. But the reason it felt like such an important case at the time was because of the opportunity it gave us to really shift the narrative from one which was really focused on the hardships and the challenges and the barriers and the fragility of transgender people to a narrative of strength and courage and service and contributions. And the fact that we had transgender people who had been putting their lives on the line, some of them for decade plus because of their service in the military, to say all we want is continued ability to serve our country, I think really gave us the chance, and I think it was incredibly successful to shift the narrative to one of the ways in which our country is worse off by the barriers that we put in people's place to serve and contribute. So that was a really, I think, big moment, both in terms of the shift in understanding of transgender people's lives and that picture that could be held up for transgender young people and adults, about the possibility of their future. And I think that's what is so excruciating about this moment that we're in which young people are facing laws that exclude them from school programs, from facilities, from organizations, from community events, from access to healthcare that's life-sustaining. And I despair of what that means in terms of young people, transgender people's vision of the possibility for their futures, and that's why the work is so so critical, and so essential. But I think, kind of circling back, it is the possibility of seeing yourself in whole, you know, a lot of different contexts that I think has really dramatically shifted the possibility and the opportunity, but then also I think has fueled the reactionary, you know, hostility that we.
So during that clip about how powerful it was for people to hear the stories of transgender people being focused on service, on their ability to do their job that they were called to do, what lessons from that time, Jennifer, Shannon, you envision bringing into the current moment?
Well, I would just say that case, Jennifer, was the hardest case I have ever worked on and kind of the scariest. I mean, it was so terrifying when the president of the United States just popped out of nowhere and said he was going to expel transgender people from military service. It was, I mean, what an awful thing to happen. It was just so, I think it was designed in part, and we may be reliving this. We're going to talk about that thing in a minute, but it was designed in part, I think, to be, to render us immobile, to just be, you know, shock and awe and kind of, you know, terrorism of like, we're coming after you. There's nothing you're going to be able to do. And honestly, Jennifer, I give you all the credit in the world. You're the one who just said to me, we've got to challenge this. I was like, don't you think maybe someone else could do that? Do we really have to do that? And you're like, no, we have to do it. And we did, and we stepped up and did it. But the thing that made it possible was getting support from, you know, all of the former secretaries of the Navy, Air Force, Army, and so forth. And as you were just alluding to on the panel there, just hearing them be so soberly and deeply distressed by that, not because they're real transgender advocates, but by the thought that any group of people would be treated that way, any group of service members would be treated that way, and that it was such a betrayal of the way that military policy is supposed to be made, and just of the principles that it's supposed to be run on, that it's open to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are. It's, you know, you can do the job. That's all it's supposed to matter. And that was, it was just so inspiring and uplifting to get that level of support from people at that level of our society.
Yeah. Yes, all of that. And it was an extraordinary, difficult case. And it was so important that we responded so quickly to what was at the time a tweet. And just to remind folks, because it has been, you know, almost 8 years since we've been in the situation of this kind of administration coming in, and we know a lot more, of course, than we knew last time. But because this time what we know is this administration will follow through on everything it says that it will do. That really wasn't, like, people weren't certain about that in January of 2017. And, you know, there were questions about, like, can you make federal policy by a tweet? And what we learned is you can, because it's the direction that the president's going to give to federal agencies. And so it was so important that we stepped up so quickly to respond. And I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things, Shannon, that you were saying. And it's, you know, I remember talking to, you know, Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Air Force, and having them explain to me that differences in the military fall away when somebody puts on the uniform, right? The idea is that we're looking to the skill sets, to the, you know, the courage, to the bravery that somebody brings, not who they are and the differences that divide us. So that, you know, again, it was explained to me that the military is intended to operate as a meritocracy. And the point is actually to strip away individual identity and to create the strength of what can come when people are focused on the mission. And so, yeah, these secretaries of the military who, you know, learned about transgender people and understood who transgender people are and had actually made a recommendation to revert from the prior policy that excluded transgender people from serving, we're in support of continued service of transgender people, not because of particular compassion or concern about transgender people, but because of the stability of the military and how important it is not to have policy directed by political whim. And just to kind of pick up on something that you said, Shannon, yep, there have been certainly public reports of the real possibility that we would, again, be heading into a reversal of military policy that would risk the discharge of, what at this point are thousands of transgender people who have been serving in the military, who have relied on a policy that allows people to serve, and also that would change the policy for enlisting in the military to exclude people from who meet the qualifications of military service to nevertheless be denied because of who they are. And GLAD Law and National Center for Lesbian Rights will step up and challenge that if that's what we're facing as we did before.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate how you talk about how important it is to just be brave in these moments and to recognize that this trans-military ban is more than just being about the military, that this is about getting used to not seeing trans folks in public life. And I appreciate how much you went into that, because I think that could be confusing for some people. This is more than just talking about the military. So thank you so much for that. So the three of you in your conversation, of course, talked about the current climate of laws targeting trans people. And we know that this is especially true for transgender young people. We also know that because we've been doing some messaging strategy work, how incredibly powerful it is when we hear authentic journeys of the experiences of the parents of trans kids when their children are inviting them in. And so these next clips show us how compelling that can be. So let's watch.
I think the immediate thought that comes to me is that we have been fighting this for a very long time in Texas, specifically around the bathroom bill in 2013, 2015, 2017, the failed attempt at passing that bill. And people weren't waking up, and it didn't feel like folks were understanding the urgency, not even within folks that were on our side. And something happened in 2021, leading to 2022, when the governor and the attorney general were cahoots, decided to dictate or direct the Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate loving parents of transgender young people as child abusers. And something happened that was so visceral and so offensive to just Americans, where we saw the outrage for the first time. And that moment has been replicated again, where I think people have a higher tolerance for these attacks, right? And so they have been conditioned to expect this to be common. And folks forget that we as individuals have an opportunity and power to dictate what is permissible in terms of how we treat each other, right? So I think it's critical for folks to just meet transgender people, right? For stories about the lives of transgender people to be shared with the world, right? Because I think there is this viewpoint that trans stories are anchored in despair, and that's not true, right? Our lives are anchored in tremendous joy, and we show up to fight because we're forced to. And I think that universal empathy and compassion, I think, still lives within the human spirit, even if people are jaded. And that often helps, right? I remember a time when I went to the state legislature in Texas, and a family came with me, and a transgender girl who was trying to play sports with her friends in Houston ended up meeting one of our Republican House representatives, House reps, and he didn't say very much during the meeting. She followed up and wrote him a letter, like a handwritten letter to the 7-year-old at the time. And he carried that letter in his pocket for the entirety of that legislative session because he was so moved. And I think she challenged his belief system in a very visceral way that he couldn't look away anymore. And he couldn't pretend that he wasn't part of this thing that was making her life more difficult. And that changed him in some regard. And he
he still didn't have the uncommon courage that we needed in that moment to defeat that bill ultimately. But something changed about him, and he was more willing to work with us because he met a human being that he couldn't deny was a happy, joyful, well-adjusted 7-year-old who just wanted to play with her friends and just happened to suck in sports, right? At the same time.
You know, we have a challenge led into our in Alabama to their ban, and you know, we had a pretty extensive hearing to get a preliminary injunction, which was subsequently reversed by the 11th Circuit. But we have, you know, very experienced local trial counsel there. You know, we did all the things, you become expert witnesses and all that, and we have great witnesses, and the state had the world's work. I mean, the most terrible experts ever. Even really conservative judges, it's kind of like, this is what you get, this is what you got. Like, really? But you know, our trial counsel said that they thought the thing that really just sealed it for our judge was hearing from one of our parents.
Yeah.
And parents are really good.
Yeah.
Folks.
But I was gonna say, and we were working also in a case in Florida, and I think Chris, it was the witness you may have put on at the preliminary injunction, which is mom of a transgender young person who was just so compelling, both in terms of the clear love and support that she had for her child, and also the offense of the state stepping in the way of her getting the medical care that her kid needed to thrive. Similarly, I thought that was like a moment where you could just see the judge understanding the issue in a visceral way that, you know, the judges needed all the other expert testimony as well, but that was just like a really big emotional shift in the courtroom. But before we get into that, you know, New Hampshire passed 3 anti-trans laws this last legislative session, which is devastating. And, you know, despite unbelievably, you know, deep work by GLAD and our partners, that's the direction that we've seen political shift. And, you know, one of the laws bans transgender young people from playing sports. So we brought, you know, important challenge to that law that's really building on work that you all did for sure, and are continuing to do in Utah, Arizona, which also builds on work that our partner organizations have done in Idaho and West Virginia, and other places. And Sam recounted the story today. We went in for a TRO, temporary restraining order, at 2 o'clock. So that our client could go to soccer practice at 6 o'clock at the beginning of the school year. And she was sitting in, you know, at least the row behind me in the courtroom. And like, if I can convey to you the power of a decision, well, first of all, that you have to go to court for, you know, how old is she? 15? Yeah, for a 15-year-old to get to go to soccer practice, you sit in a courtroom to wait for a court to rule whether or not she can go to soccer practice that day. I mean, the weight of that is just beyond anything that anybody should have to endure. But at the same time, to see the joy on her face and her family's face when the court ruled from the bench that she got to go to soccer practice, you know, was really dramatic and transformative. And so, you know, that case is important.
Thank you so much. These are just beautiful examples. And it's really moments like this that change the tide. And I know that many of us have witnessed incredible moments like this or been part of them ourselves. Jennifer and Shannon, is there anything that you want to share about that? Anything you said or anything that's come up for you since you've been thinking about it?
Yeah, you know, I just want to say, I think the single most important thing that has happened in the transgender movement in my lifetime is the emergence of this incredible group of parents who are coming forward and being advocates for their children, including, you know, younger children. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, there was in that that happened, at a certain point in time. I mean, it's really been only a visible political public phenomenon for, I don't know, I probably can't pinpoint the time, but maybe past 15-ish years, sort of. And it's been absolutely transformative. I will say that parents of transgender children are our most powerful spokespeople. They have an ability to reach other people and to build public support that is just absolutely unparalleled. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to talk a little maybe about some of the research that we've done on that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So what we know is that parents are powerful voices, and that, talking about the ways in which particularly the healthcare bans interfere with parents' ability to get well-established treatment for their children is something that connects people across demographics, and has really been a powerful way to demonstrate the harms and that these laws cause, and also the ways in which even people who may not know that they could be impacted by a law have to think about it. So, one of the things that we found is it's really important for parents to acknowledge that it can be a journey to come to understand what it is and what it means to have a transgender child. And, it's one of the things certainly that we've come to understand is that it's so important to be able to acknowledge the misinformation or the misunderstanding that many people might have, and that but at the end of the day, the parents are being precluded from getting what they know and what they have learned from professionals that their children need to thrive. So it's, I guess I'll say one other thing, and then Shannon, I want you to talk a little bit more too about those pieces. But there are really all the polls show that people oppose discrimination against transgender people. North of 70% of people will say that they oppose discrimination, but they don't necessarily see the links between the restrictions on healthcare and discrimination. So it's one of the things that we have to really be able to demonstrate and kind of break through that gap between what people feel and think and what they don't necessarily understand about the ways in which the laws are impacting families and kids.
Yeah, we really have to connect those dots, Jennifer. But one of the most harmful stereotypes about transgender people is that that we're outside of society, we're isolated, we're rejected by everyone, and have no place, no support system, no place. So to see parents, for people to visibly see parents supporting a transgender child, like just even that image alone is just so powerful and undoing a lot of those negative perceptions. I mean, I just can't say enough about what a powerful antidote to the bias that transgender people face that has proved to be and is continuing to be. But yeah, Jennifer, you make a great point. We have reached a point which is pretty extraordinary, and thanks to all the decades of work that a bunch of you listening in right now have been part of. We're to the point now where a very strong majority of people in this country oppose discrimination against transgender people, and at the same time now we've allowed the bad guys to plant these negative ideas in people's heads about the healthcare for transgender youth. And so that we've got to bridge that gap. We've got to help the public understand that these terrible laws that ban this healthcare, it's not like they're banning certain medications that are thought to be harmful for all young people. No. They're banning medications that are regularly used by non-transgender young people, that are prescribed to non-transgender young people for a variety of medical conditions. And they only ban those medications when they're required by a transgender young person. So, I mean, that is discrimination, but we really need to do a better job of explaining that to people. But if we can bridge that gap and tap into that very deep pre-existing well of opposition to discrimination against transgender people, we could really turn this healthcare issue around. And we need to do that. We're under incredible attack right now on that front.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all. I think it's important to just acknowledge that there are some folks who may be watching or maybe joining us tonight who are parents of trans or LGBTQ kids, older people, and thank you for fiercely standing with your child and advocating on their behalf. I will say that I have a sibling who came out very at 9-10 years old, and my parents were super supportive, and we had our one and only family meeting as they were kind of experiencing and going through their journey of understanding, and told us that they loved us, right? And I just want to affirm that it is incredibly meaningful what you are doing, even if your children don't have the words to tell you now. It is something that will come back and they will remember for the rest of their lives. I certainly do, and I didn't know how huge of a thing they were doing when I was younger, but I've come to appreciate it as an adult so very much. So thank you. We covered the U.S. Skrmetti case at the Supreme Court during the last time we chatted about laws banning well-established healthcare for transgender adolescents. I want to watch the clip, but I also want to note that this is something that's come up in the comments quite a bit since we started, and not specific questions, but just an acknowledgement that South Carolina passed a similar law, that there are other states that have passed similar laws, and just want to hold that space that this is top of mind for very many people.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, as you said, we talked about Skrmetti in our last call, but just to say the obvious, which is the outcome in that case is going to be tremendously impactful in terms of the challenges to other laws and potentially some of the federal changes to come. And at the same time, I want to say that in our cases in Alabama and Florida, we have also pursued other pathways that will continue to be viable avenues for challenging these laws, sort of however Skrmetti comes out. And then also just to switch back to talking about the power of parents, there's of course the public impact on the power that parents have to really change the narrative around transgender young people. But there is also a legal challenge to the laws that restrict parents' ability to get well-established medical care for their young people, and that parental autonomy claim, is also out there as an avenue to challenging some of these laws.
So before we go too much deeper into the Skrmetti case, we want to just take a minute to just review the clip from the overview of the Skrmetti case the last time we met, and then we'll just kind of add up. We'll turn it to you, Shannon, and then if you have anything to add, Jennifer, we'll turn to you one more time.
So the Supreme Court is hearing a case about the challenge to one of the laws banning medical care for transgender young people. This whole thing is played out in such extraordinary and interesting kind of way, because I remember, gosh, what was that first one? Was it 2020 in Arkansas?
I think so.
Yeah. Was it also the same year Alabama?
I think it was the prior year and then Alabama, the next session.
Anyway,
It might have been 2019 and then 2020.
things changed so quickly because we really hoped back then that it wouldn't spread. I mean, it was these laws, it was just out of the blue, it was so extraordinary, so strange, unthinkable. We're just like, okay, we just gotta stop this, and surely this isn't gonna spread. Well, now half the country has passed these laws, and glad NCLR, other groups jumped in, but challenging them everywhere we can. The extraordinary thing is, out of the first 10 federal court challenges, we won 9 of them in front of including some of the most conservative judges in the country. That's how strong the evidence is on our side and how completely non-existent it is on the other side. Even the one that we lost, that was Oklahoma, the court didn't consider the evidence there. They just said, by that time there had been some reversals by appellate courts. Because what's happening is the district courts hear the evidence, they hear the parents, they hear the doctors, etc. They hear how the states have nothing, the red states have nothing to back up these outlandish claims they're making, and then they rule in our favor. Then it goes up to the appellate courts. They're not hearing from anybody. It's all on paper. they're not even really looking at the evidence presented at all. They're just saying, these laws don't discriminate. So they're subject only to like the minimus judicial review. And so that 10th court, those lower court relied on those appellate court decisions. Like, I don't even need to look at this evidence. You know, the state doesn't have to they have to have this embarrassed idea of a reason, and that's good enough. But I mean, that's how strong this all is on our side of the fence, where the courts are looking at the evidence. Anyhow, one of those bad appellate decisions has now gone up to the Supreme Court. There was a challenge to Kentucky's law, challenge to Tennessee's law banning medical care. We got PIs in both those cases. Went up to the Sixth Circuit in a consolidated appeal, and the Sixth Circuit was like, no, there's no discrimination here. So this is subject only to rational basis review. And it's, you know, just kind of rubber stamped it. And the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the Tennessee challenge. The United States intervened in the Tennessee case, which I think is why the court took that one, and the Solicitor General filed a cert petition, and the court accepted it, and that's all very good for us. You know, that's, I think, it's great to have the United States, you know, being the one to stand up and tell the court, hey, this is unconstitutional. Yeah, and it's interesting that our Solicitor General, Elizabeth Trailblazers, we could not have a better advocate arguing for us. Not only is she just like the most brilliant oral arguer I've ever heard, period, she is deeply familiar with these issues, because before she became Solicitor General, she was just getting involved in these cases pro bono. Yeah, she argued the first challenge to a sports ban in Idaho.
Yeah.
Even before she was Solicitor General.
At a private law firm, yeah.
She was our co-counsel in I think it's the first, no, I don't know. But anyway, she was our co-counsel in a challenge to Idaho refusing to provide medical care to a transgender prisoner. I mean, she just really knows this area of law.
Yeah. And the thing I was going to add, and I know lots of people may be familiar with the Skrmetti case, not everybody does, but the argument that's being made is that if you single out transgender young people and deny them medical treatment because they are transgender, that heightened scrutiny applies because it's discrimination on the basis of transgender status and therefore on the basis of sex. And it's a pretty middle of the road argument that rests on well-established Supreme Court precedent in the Bostock case, in which the court said that discrimination on the basis of transgender status and sexual orientation is sex discrimination. So it's like basketball down the middle in terms of the legal argument. And I mean, I'm hopeful, you know, somebody asked the other day, well, how are you going to count 5 votes? And I thought, well, it's not hard in this case to count 5 votes. You've got, you know, 3 progressive, supportive justices. You have Justice Gorsuch that wrote the Bostock opinion, and you have Justice Roberts, who seems unlikely to depart from well-established precedent. Now, I'm not, you know, I don't know how that goes, because we're just in unpredictable legal times, but if you were going to apply well-established legal principles, this should not be a hard case. It shouldn't be, yeah. I think we have a real chance because of what Jennifer just explained. The issue from the court is a very narrow one. All they need to decide is, do these laws facially discriminate against transgender youth? They don't have to decide whether the medical care is legitimate or valid. They don't have to know anything about the medical care. It's a very discrete, focused legal issue that they have already decided in Bostock. So if they follow their own precedent, we should have a chance.
So it's been nearly 2 weeks since the arguments in Skrmetti happened a couple weeks back on December 4th. Any additional thoughts besides what has already been shared, Shannon? Jennifer?
Yeah, Jennifer was right. You were right, Jennifer. I thought the argument went exactly along the lines you sort of predicted. I think Justice Gorsuch not saying anything through the whole argument is a good sign for us, because I think if he was going to change his mind and come up with a whole new way of analyzing this very same issue, he would have had questions. So I'm encouraged by that. And I think Chief Justice Roberts played it very close to the vest and was very even-handed. And I still think exactly what you said. There's every reason to think he will stick with his prior position. And then Justice Amy Coney Barrett was a very pleasant surprise. And I think, she's clearly thinking about these issues very seriously and said a lot of sympathetic things during the argument. So I'm really encouraged. We do have a chance. We absolutely have a chance to win this. And you're going to hear that. You will not hear that out in the world. Out in the world, you're going to hear a lot of negativity. The mainstream press was like, oh, they're going to uphold this law. And there's a lot of naysayers out there. And look, yes, could we lose? Yes, we could lose the case. But I'm telling you all, we have a real chance. We have a very real chance to win this case.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we have a real chance. I agree. Hard to really know what the outcome is going to be. But one thing I wanted to add is, a victory here would be the court saying that heightened scrutiny applies and sending the case back down to consider whether or not the government can advance a justification that is closely enough related to the ban that it survives. And I think with heightened scrutiny, well, that, the outcome should be really clear. But just for folks that are following it, what would be a victory would be sending the case back down. It was interesting just to note that, Justice Alito, who is, clearly not with us on this issue, I think I can say that, spent a lot of time really asking questions relating to the science and the facts and international policy, and he did it really to just avoid the direct question that was in front of the court, which is about whether or not heightened scrutiny applies and whether or not the government has to meet a heightened burden in order to demonstrate that there's a justification for a law in that context. And in a way, I guess I took it as a good sign. I know that seems kind of strange because it probably felt uncomfortable to have Justice Alito digging into the science and the facts on the ground, even though I will say there were answers for absolutely everything. And actually Justice Prelogar, sorry, not Justice Prelogar, she could be, the Solicitor General, who argued for the United States, had an answer to every question that was asked, and including saying, no, of course, it's not true that the treatments are banned internationally, and it is true that the science is completely solid to demonstrate efficacy. But I took it as a good sign that Justice Alito was kind of asking all these questions that really don't bear a close relationship to the legal issue that was in front of the court, because I think he was trying to do it really to erode the support that he was probably evaluating among his colleagues on the bench. So, could we lose this case? Of course we can lose this case. I think the argument went tremendously well, and I'm hopeful and optimistic. And then just to pick up on what I was saying before we saw the clips, there are other pathways to challenge these laws, no matter how Skrmetti comes out. We have National Center for Lesbian Rights and GLAD Law have litigated the case in Florida. And I see Liz Schwartz, I see you in the chat, and thanks for all your amazing continued work in Florida, and argued successfully to a district court that even where it wasn't obvious on the face of the statute that a ban on medical treatment is targeting a vulnerable group, that we could still demonstrate that there was purposeful discrimination and intent to harm a group, and therefore the higher level of scrutiny should apply. And how did we know that? Because the decision makers said that that's what they wanted to do, was to harm transgender people, and that they had moral opposition to transgender people. And so, there's pathways forward, however the Skrmetti case comes out, but I am hopeful.
There's always paths forward. Hey, and I just want to know, Jennifer, I have learned this over the years from working with Jennifer. Jennifer is always right about everything. So you just said it, December 7th, what is it, 17th, 2024. You said Justice Prelogar.
Yeah.
That is going to happen. Yes.
Yeah, mark that down.
Mark that down. Then I really think she will end up on the Supreme Court. So yay, that was a very happy Freudian slip. Yeah, but just to underscore your point, I'm hopeful we're going to win. If for some reason we don't, there are other paths forward. Just as Jennifer just explained, we're certainly not going to give up no matter what happens.
Can I say one quick thing? I know we've got another clip, but I think there are a lot of people who have asked, well, what are the pathways forward given the change in composition in the court? And I will tell you, I think that the work that we have done and that we'll continue to do in the courts, including the federal courts, is important because we have to show up, we have to make the arguments, we have to put obstacles in the way of those who would undermine our rights and protections. And lots can change in a short time, and lots can change in a long time. And also we can sometimes be surprised about the potential outcomes. And so, I don't know. I believe in the promise that the Constitution provides, and we have to really make it work for us and continue to do that work. So we will.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think you just said, Jennifer, just some brilliant things here. And you too, Shannon. I think it went really well as well. I really enjoyed watching Skrmetti. I think we have a real shot here, and that's something that's really important. And during a time that everyone is asking us, what do we do in this moment? We've never been in a moment like this. And that's true, but you're exactly right that we have to make things as hard as possible. We have to fight absolutely everything that we can and make this go as slow as possible. And really, that has to be our strategy. So thank you so much for your brilliance right now. We appreciate you all. So for this next clip, this is going to seem like a lifetime ago, but this was back in October, and you rounded out the conversation by talking about what was then the upcoming election, and you were talking about what was at stake. So let's get into that clip.
I know the election is on everyone's mind, and this will be the last question before we open it up to folks who may be dying to ask another question. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is at stake in this election for transgender people and what people should prepare for, regardless of the outcome of the election?
I'll answer the first part. So I'll share. I have been traveling. I was away for the last 3 weeks in Nepal and India, and it was really interesting to be among mostly non-U.S. citizens, and noting that all eyes are on this country's election. I'm hiking, that was my goal, and people say like, are you gonna be back by November or whatever? And first I'm like, wait, what's that date? What's happening? But all eyes are on what's gonna happen. And the reason I want to answer the first part of the question is I just think everything's at stake. Rule of law, climate, immigration, safety, just all of the issues that affect everybody is what's at stake. And of course, that means that transgender people's lives are at risk and at stake, and queer people's lives are as well. But I do think it's so important for all of us to, kind of have that perspective of what the stakes are. And, just again, to kind of bring this international perspective, it's so clear, because people share that, other countries political regimes are shifting in relationship to what we are seeing in terms of shifts in this country, and the dialogue and what's fair game even to say, just kind of harking back what Shannon was saying, which is true. We thought we could continue to fight off these unbelievably reactionary laws, and when the first one was passed, it was so surprising, and we still thought we could fight off the next laws, and they got worse. First it was like professional degrees at stake, and then professional licensure at stake, and then it was criminalization, and then it was felony, then it was like, competing civil claims for damages for provision of care. It just, there is no bottom. And so, yeah, I just think all of that is at stake for sure, in this upcoming election. And then, I will just say though, for me, it's not like however it goes, the work will continue. And honestly, however the election comes out, I mean, the lesson for me around the last outcome, which was an incoming Biden administration, which seemed to have resulted in unbelievable polarization and the most reactionary laws passed in conservative states, is the lesson of we've got to just continue the work, deepen the work, be ready for anything, continue to mobilize, expand the mobilization. Everybody can do what they can do to contribute. And when I say, which I do totally think, like everything's at stake, climate, immigration, safety, economics, you know, racial justice, everything is always at stake. And I can do what I can do, which means supporting all of that work and dig into, continue to do the transgender and queer advocacy that's going to be essential at every level, and without learn both from our mistakes and from our successes. And I'll just say one more thing. I think we also continue to do the positive work in the states where we can do it. We have to do it in a thoughtful, careful way, as I said. I mean, I think it's amazing this last legislative session in Massachusetts to see some really dramatic, important policy changes going forward, and we have support, you know, from legislators and from communities that are ready to, when they can, make positive change. And I think we have to do it in careful ways, because that does also deepen the reactionary responses and all of those pieces as well. So it's like everything, everybody, everywhere, all at once. So I don't know. That's what I think. What do you think?
Oh gosh, yeah, no,
Ricardo,
yeah, that was great. Yeah, well, I this is the team a little bit. I think so great, Ricardo, you're new leader. We're glad because of what you just said. I mean, you know, we really now have to get very serious about coordinating blue state, red state policy work and messaging and all that. It's absolutely essential. I mean, I live in Texas now, Ricardo was just there. It's really scary to be living in a red state right now as an LGBTQ person, and especially honestly as a transgender person. We do need to be smart about all this. I mean, it's depending on how the election goes, we could face really terrible setbacks. I mean, GLAD and NCLR challenged the first state laws restricting healthcare for adults in Florida. So far, Florida is the only state to do that, but I fear for the future, particularly depending on what happens in the election. It's going to be potentially a very rough time. Yeah, I mean, that's why I was harkening back to Phyllis, even in my own mind. I mean, that was a rough time too. And Phyllis, we were all starting all this, and you know, we can weather it, but it's going to require a lot of different orientation than we've had. I think. Yeah.
Discipline, commitment.
Yeah.
More expansion of support.
Right. I know what else. Yeah, and no matter, I think it seems like whatever happens, like it's going to be close. We just have to get more serious about reaching people where they are, and not just talking to ourselves, not just having messaging that sounds good to us. We've got to bring people along with us. I mean, we really have to do that. Yeah.
What do you think, Ricardo?
Yeah.
Well, you know that I'm an optimist, so I think there's a tremendous amount of promise, regardless of the outcome, right? I work in Texas where we don't necessarily have any institutional power, and I've repeated this so many times. We don't have a House majority, we don't have the Senate, we don't have a supportive Speaker of the House, we don't have a Lieutenant Governor that is supportive, or a governor, or any of the state agencies. There really is no institutional power in Texas, and yet Texas defeated 96% of the 143 bills that were filed last year in the state, and that shouldn't have happened. So miraculous things can happen when people do their part, right? And I think that I rest in the hope that I believe in the people, and we have a tremendous amount of power if you can compound it, and people are doing their small part in small and large ways every single day. So I try to anchor myself in that and take it a day at a time, obviously plan for the worst case scenario. And if we're there, then just hustle and work incredibly hard to make the lives of LGBTQ people much better.
That was great. I mean, I think we're at a place now where we obviously know the outcome of the election, but I think you all really articulated what would need to happen in any direction anyway. And so I think you did a really great job there. But that said, knowing what we know now, is there anything that you would say differently today, if anything?
Wow, Imani, thanks so much for that question. It is kind of interesting to think about that conversation having taken place before the election, because, I guess, I don't know, I didn't even know necessarily at the time that I was as realistic about the possibilities, because I was so hopeful at the same time. But I do think we have to meet this moment. That means we have to meet people where they're at. I think that it is really important for us not to walk into false narratives, which describe, like just the only possibilities are polarized positions that are either all or nothing. And I think it is so important for us to acknowledge that there are nuances and that there are, gradations of positions that are out there, because I think that what folks are doing, and, certainly the press is a part of this, but I think also the opponents of equality are doing this, is to frame LGBTQ people and the LGBTQ movement as being extreme and unreasonable. And it's, we know that isn't the case. And I'll just, I'll give an example. Folks have been following this, maybe more so on the East Coast, but probably across the country. There's a Massachusetts legislator, Seth Moulton, who has said that people aren't willing to have a conversation about policies in sports, for example. And it's not true. I'll just say National Center for Lesbian Rights was a leader over a decade ago in bringing together stakeholders, including athletes and coaches and sports physiologists, and developing a really reasonable policy that was in place in the NCAA, is in place in the NCAA, and has been so for a very long time. And the polls that have been polarized positions that have been reflected in the public, which is either, it's all or nothing on one side or the other, is just not a realistic reflection of where the community is at. And I'll say the same thing is true around healthcare. It's been a really important part of the public discussion to acknowledge that the standards of care require multidisciplinary evaluation and an appropriate determination of what healthcare people need. And so I think it's really important for us not to kind of walk into a narrative that is an either or and an all or nothing, and meet people where they're at. Even more so, perhaps now.
Jennifer, absolutely, friend. Yes. I mean, it was so distressing, to say the least, to see the way transgender people were targeted in the election. Everyone saw the ads. It was, a prime focus, if not the primary focus of the campaign. And that has got to be a wake-up call for us. I mean, you heard even before the election, Jennifer and I were both saying we've got to persuade people, we've got to bring them to us, we have to meet people where they are. Well, just times a million now, times a million. It is, the bad thing happened, and transgender people are in the crosshairs in a way that is hard to fathom, hard to accept, hard to acknowledge, but we have got to get real about it now. And we have an absolute moral imperative, a political imperative to reach people. And we really do, as I've said on that panel there, we have to just stop talking to ourselves and talking in ways that sound good to us. And we have to talk in ways that ordinary people can understand and explain our lives and humanize ourselves in a way that allows people to see the reality of who we are and see that we are like them, just ordinary human beings who want to be able to live safely, work, have families, contribute to society, all of those things. That is so important now. And I guess I'll just circle around one more time in this to all the families out there, or if you're listening, or we all know them, what an important role they have to play in this, to just show the world and show other people who live in this country with us that, we are part and parcel of the fabric of society, and that is so important. And I will give a shout out to Rigo from Advocates for Equality for being very brave and coming out and saying that we need to make room for people to come our direction and help people who are not with us now, help them change their minds. And we have to very intentionally create space for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, both of you. I mean, I think you're already showing that we know what we have to be doing in the future because we're already doing it now. And I know that both at GLAD Law and at NCLR, a lot of what we're doing is preparing for how we can show up in this new administration. We get a lot of questions about people that really want to know what to expect with the federal administration. So I want to ask, what are the main things that you're watching for? How would you tell folks that are watching tonight what we can all do to prepare?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, we're watching for different periods of time, different potential shifts in policy. So there's day one, right? And we know, and we can count on a number of executive orders being issued by the incoming administration that direct the rollback of protections that have been put in place over the last 4 years. That may indeed include an executive order that directs the denial of federal funding. It potentially includes an executive order that would direct the reversal of federal policy that has articulated the full breadth of Bostock to roll it back across other areas. We're closely tracking for the possibility of a military ban. And then, there's a period of those aren't necessarily self-executing. And so then we have to track and see how those directives are followed by the different federal agencies. And of course, we have to keep a watch on Congress because of the potential of making even more dramatic some of the exclusions for LGBTQ people in federal law. I will say that, and I know Shannon and NCLR is in agreement that our approach really here is to stop everything that we can, delay things that we can't, and to build into and across the community harm reduction measures, because we know there are going to be people who are hurt, and we're not going to be able to address all of what will roll out, but we need to do what we can, and we need to do that by building some of the safety nets across organizations. We're going to work with progressive states where it's possible to ensure that there is increased access to healthcare because of the demand that's going to be coming from other states where there's growing hostility towards it. Obviously, we've got to keep our eyes on protections for families and ensure that marriage equality remains. And I know that all of our organizations are really committed to that. In terms of what people can do, I mean, we've got to be in it for the short term and for the long term. So there is, really important ways to ensure that people can prepare, not panic. And so, for example, people who are looking at ensuring protections for young people's medical care, make sure that you have access to your medical records, be talking and putting into place alternative plans to ensure healthcare access where that's possible. Making sure that people are tracking and following the legal organizations who are, will be doing our best to get the information out there as quickly as we can. I've been really heartened to see the tremendous focus across the community on the Defense Authorization Act, Imani, that you mentioned at the outset, and people are really, on it, following it, doing what they can to reach out to their members of Congress to tell them where they are in that, and that's going to be potentially happening fairly fast and furious when this Congress comes into session. And then I was saying that, for the long term, organizing is local, and continuing to do that work in your family, in your local communities, at the state level and at the federal level, at each of those is really important. I said this on the clip, and I'll just say it again. There's so much work to do right now. And Ricardo, I totally agree with the tap in and tap out. And when people are tapped in, find the area in which you can make a contribution and make that work and stay in connection with people who are doing other work. We can't all do everything, but we can all do pieces of it.
It's just beautiful, Jennifer. I don't have much to add to that. That was a very comprehensive answer. Yeah. And other than to just echo one thing you said, we can slow a lot of this down in the courts. There's still plenty of good courts in this country. We have amazingly good arguments, and we still do have a judicial system where you have to actually put on evidence, and there are rules of evidence, and the facts, the truth is on our side, and that has really, we've been winning even in front of some very conservative judges for that very reason. So that will continue to be one like powerful way that we can fight back. And I'll say, we did that just for example, the last time Trump was president and he imposed a military ban, we slowed that thing down. We stopped it from going into effect for 2 years. And the precedents that were set in that effort have since paid off incredibly. We've been relying on some of those precedents to challenge some of the healthcare bans. So the legal work is and will continue to be very important. And then also, Jennifer, just what you said, like just community building is so important right now. Just making sure don't let yourself get isolated. We need to get back kind of to the old days of remembering that community doesn't just happen by itself, and we really do have to very intentionally build it.
Can I add 2 things quick? Because Shannon, I really appreciate the point that you raised about both putting off the military policy, but also I do believe that our very quick response meant that the policy eventually ensured that people who were serving wouldn't be subject to discharge, and that there was an exception for that broad announcement that was made by the initial by President Trump then for those who were ongoing in service. And so I do think that moving very quickly is going to slow things down and is also going to change the course of the path that that they intend. And I'll also say, I think showing up matters. I think seeing people stand up for one another, and also I'll just say this, the courage that the plaintiffs that we represent bring to each of these efforts in court is inspirational and history making. And I think we all have to see that happen. And I think that's, an important piece of it, even knowing, we know it, right? There are going to be people who are harmed along the way, and we've got to try to reduce and minimize that.
Thank you. So I know that we're running low on time, but I do want to honor and create space for some of the questions that came in. We'll probably only be able to take 1 or 2, but if you can entertain, if we go over 4 minutes, please hang on. This is an interesting question, Jennifer and Shannon. I have an idea after working with both of you how you navigate this space, but it would be great for you just to maybe talk a little bit about, in your legal career, how do you balance your patriotism and love for the Constitution with the need to challenge the status quo?
Well, the former gives you a really powerful tool to do the latter. Yeah, I mean, I draw direct inspiration from the Black Civil Rights Movement and other civil rights movements before us, which have continually move things forward by challenging this country to live up to the principles in our Constitution, particularly the principle of equal protection. There's supposed to be equality under the law for all of us. That is a powerful, powerful principle. And it has served us well, and will continue to do so.
Well, it is such a powerful question. I feel like we owe ourselves and history the responsibility of standing up and challenging and requiring the Constitution follow through on the promises that were made for all of the people over history and time, along with its flaws, along with that unbelievably horrific history. That is also our country, is that promise of freedom and equality that those who drafted and supported those words intended, even when they didn't intend it. And, I think that there is an unbelievably strong history of a commitment to civil rights that I take as my responsibility going forward. And we've seen dramatic change over the time of the work that we have done. And I guess just to link this back to the beginning of the program, when I could say, and it was absolutely true, that I could walk into a small room in Texas and meet then more transgender people that I'd ever met in my life, people who had lost their jobs, faced violence, lost their family, who got together in a room to say, let's make change in our lives and other people's lives. And we've seen that happen over the course of history. And yeah, we're at an unbelievably challenging time right now. And we do need to change the status quo, and we have the tools that we need to try to make those changes. So, and I'm excited that so many people will join this call, because I hope and expect everybody to step together to really make a commitment to see that change happen.
So before we wrap, and I ask the final question very quickly, I want to plug that both NCLR and GLAD Law have legal helplines. So if you go to nclr.org, is that correct, Imani, or am I wrong?
NCLrights.org.
All right. Thank you very much. And glad.org. There are folks who have asked questions about healthcare, family protection, school identity documents. For those of you who have questions, just know that on the GLAD Law and possibly on NCLR's website, you can find Know Your Rights documents that can give you and answer some of the questions that folks have asked. Now, I want to close with a question that someone asked about centering joy in the midst of such an anticipated LGBTQ and particularly transgender hate from government entities over the course of the next 4 years. How do y'all center joy? Do you have suggestions for people to center and cultivate joy in their own lives?
I was gonna say, Shannon, that's got to be an easy one for you, right? Like adopt 25, 17 dogs. Would that be?
Yeah, that'd be it for me. Yes, my wife and I rescue animals out here in rural Texas, and that is a source of enormous joy. Lots of little kittens and dogs and puppies, and yeah, and I will say, and people. I love my community. I love my local community where I live. There are some wonderful people who have known me since I was born, and who are nothing but loving and supporting and accepting of me being transgender. And it's just, I feel very blessed every day to have that experience.
Well, I'm happy I don't have that many animals in my house. That gives me joy. And yeah, I love that question too. Be active, get out, see the world. When the sun is shining, make sure that you feel it. And I try to do those things. I try to stay centered in my body and not just in my mind, and be outside and hiking on a mountain when I get the chance, and spending time with my family. And I think my spouse is listening to this tonight, and I feel incredibly blessed to have the support of my family in doing this work, and also appreciate the times when I can step away from it and also enjoy that too.
Jennifer, the only thing y'all are missing is a kitten.
Anyone that wants a kitten that's on this call, email Shannon.
Has one to offer you. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. That is the time that we have tonight. I want to give a special thanks to Jennifer and Shannon for taking your evening and sharing your brilliance. I want to thank my incredible co-host, Ricardo. I'm so happy that you are at GLAD. So excited to see your leadership and just work closer with you. I just think the world of you. So, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I know that a lot of folks are staying up late, so thank you for being here. This is a really challenging time, and so many of us are worried about what comes next, but it's opportunities like this where we can get together and be in community. And it reminds us of the power that we have. So I'm so glad that we've had this time together. And remember that GLAAD Law and NCLR, we are here and we will be doing everything that we can to protect our community and defend our rights because we believe in the humanity and dignity for everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Don't forget that you can stay connected to both organizations on all social media platforms at GLAAD Law and at NCL Rights.
Bye, y'all.